Final Stop Brazil, Book 2, Life After Hell, Chapter 3, The Estágio. Bad news about my son. The school was cancelled now most of the time because the Estágio was simply too full. Throughout this isolated floor, we were about 50 women by now, all trapped and locked up until the afternoons. I was still reading, writing, or studying as much as I could, avoiding talk with these women in my cell. However, noted that a certain tension prevailed among the three, and the atmosphere was real poisoned. While in all other cells had been made the best of the situation, and even got quite funny sometimes, it was in my cell just sad. Elia, a Brazilian woman of my age, was suffering particularly from the situation. Patricia was just stupid and just as sloppy as Jacqueline, my enemy. So the four of us practiced our little war every day, and I also had my turns of attacking. In the 7-month Arusha, I learned very well where to hit the most sensitive nerve of the Brazilians, and here was where I made my move. On Tuesday, after my transfer to the PFC, Carandiru, I had a visit of Mr. Storm. Full of hope that he had received my letter and would bring me cigarettes and other things to survive, I greeted him kindly, for once. No use, though. My hopes were disappointed. According to him, he didn't receive my letter and wasn't very thoughtful otherwise either. The way he had boasted that he knew this prison too well, he certainly should have known about the first 30 days of solitary confinement. But nothing. No cigarettes, nothing to read, drink, or eat. Asshole, I thought secretly. More elegant, I expressed my anger and had to listen to, "You can be glad that I came to visit you at all." Well, he wasn't so handsome that just to look at him was plain enjoyment. The hope that he had a letter from Michael still let me be patient. Unfortunately, he had not. I was disappointed, but hadn't even time for that, because the man drove me crazy again with his explanations about incoming and outgoing letters in jails like this one. According to him, all letters being written in other than the Portuguese language were thrown in the trash. But in Arusha it had worked well, so why should it be different here? I pointed out to him that I desperately needed food and cigarettes, since the food was not much better here than in Arusha. Once again he received a shopping list of things that I needed urgently. Mr. Waldman would bring me this purchase. Well, at least something slipped out of my mouth. Mr. Sturm handed me a plan of the child care for Michael. This Mr. Weiswert, the legal guardian, the man I already disliked, had created, and to which I should make my comment. Why should I? I have no saying in the matter anyway, was my only comment. Later, not now. Now this was about me, so I instructed Mr. Sturm that I needed to set up an account in this place. This we did together at once, and I realized that my Portuguese was now much better than that of Mr. Sturm, consul in Brazil. Bah! The secretary did not understand anything until I intervened and explained what I wanted. He only paid 200 reais into my new account. The old greed bones. Eventually, this was my money. Last I asked him for ways to suspend the deportation. Marriage would be pretty much the only option, was his information. Well, then I knew what I had to do. After I said goodbye to him, I was allowed to do the so-called shopping, since I had money on my account now. But the so-called shop, unfortunately, had nothing except a list on which I ticked everything possible and appropriate, rationed, amount offered. Nothing I could buy directly. But still I was glad that I was doing shopping after 7 months. However, I got the information that I had to wait a week or two before I would receive my purchases. My experience told me that in these southern countries, 1 or 2 weeks could be easily 4 weeks. Oh, great! By the time I have the stuff, the 30 days are going to be over. But I didn't have to worry long about it because on Friday, after the visit of Mr. Sturm, I received the jumbo incoming stuff of original bags and repacked into a large garbage bag after everything had been screened of Mr. Waldman, which included cigarettes, biscuits, chocolate, juice, cocoa powder, milk powder, sugar, cereal, shower gel, body cream, lighter, stamps, writing paper, envelopes, and potato chips. It was like Christmas. And when my purchases arrived, I had everything twice or 3 times because I found the same product and much more I had ticked on the list. However, I was missing my Coca-Cola Light, which I could not buy on the list, but only Coca-Cola. Jacqueline's envious eyes followed me as I pushed my jumbo under the bed. And when after 2 weeks my shopping also arrived, she was not the only one jealous. None of the 3 had received a jumbo by their families yet, and the shopping in jail nobody could do yet, due to lack of money on the accounts. Only I had the privilege. Normally, the purchase was only granted if one worked and earned money, which was then credited to the account. This wasn't the only thing, though, those 3 were jealous about. I received most mail than anyone, because all my friends from Arusha replied to my letters. Claudia kept sending me bags with little gifts. She even sent me a new white t-shirt, which I desperately needed. With a yellow uniform, we were only permitted to wear white t-shirts. Our little war was approaching its height when I wrote a letter to Andrea and told her of my problems with this Jacqueline, calling her in the letter a dirty bitch. This letter I left among my other things in the cell when I was summoned for a medical examination, and Jacqueline used the opportunity in my absence to read it. Of course, there was a lot of noise about it, but actually I had to laugh about her stupidity by admitting accidentally that she had sniffed around in my things. Reading the letter and now screaming hysterically, calmly and rationally, I told her, "If you are sniffing in my clothes, in my letters, then you have to expect to read something about yourself in it." This time, even that stupid Patricia agreed with me. But for Jacqueline, though, this was clearly too much. She still roared around hysterically as the light was turned off and no one took notice of it. And she became even louder when she discovered the lizard at the cell wall. Completely gaga was the only thing I could say, but I was shocked when Patricia caught and killed the poor beast to get some rest finally. For these 2 women, I could feel only disgust and loath. Furious, I snapped at Patricia when she was about to unscrew the light bulb again. Light switches didn't exist in the cells, but I was already used to it from Arusha. "The light stays on, and that for the rest of the night. If you people don't want to sleep and prefer to be noisy the whole night, I'm not going to put up with it no more. If I can't sleep, at least I want to occupy myself." Patricia took my sharp tone serious and did not dare turn off the light. It wasn't a problem for me to be spending the night without sleeping. I finished the interesting book I had received from Claudia, No Sky Above Africa. These stupid women couldn't neither sleep with the light on, nor could they occupy themselves. Finally, Elia sacrificed herself as a nanny and played with Jacqueline the game City Country River. Anyhow, this round I won, although this time was a death casualty, the lizard. But my thoughts were completely somewhere else. Since Mr. Waldman was not allowed to visit me personally and could only leave the jumbo, I still didn't know how Jeff had responded to my letter. How long would I probably have to wait until I got an answer to this question? Friday morning I had to go for a blood test, and when I returned at noon to the cell, I found a letter of Mr. Waldman. Strangely, the mail was distributed in the morning at 5 o'clock to the cells. This bitch tried again to suppress a letter from me. I said nothing to her, because she couldn't even open it anyway, let alone read it, because recently they were smart enough in the office to staple the letters again after opening and reading it, as far as it was possible. I read it eagerly, but was disappointed. Mr. Waldman had found out the complete address of the restaurant where Jeff was working, and had simply sent the letter by mail. Well, that was it then. Where the letter had ended up, I could vividly imagine. Jeff probably had thrown it into the trash without even reading it. Nevertheless, Mr. Waldman seemed to have understood the situation. Late was better than never, because he asked if I wanted him to go there and speak with Jeff. He did not have the time before to do so and deliver the letter personally. I immediately sat down to write him an answer, thanked him for the jumbo, smeared honey around his beard for praising that all the things he'd bought were right, nothing was missing, responded to his allegation that I would not trust him or Mr. Sturm with my money. I explained that I just wanted to clarify the situation and therefore rated my entire balance with Mr. Sturm, knowing that the €100 that my mother had sent represented a problem in terms of the social assistance. Well, if so, then they should withdraw the €100 from social assistance. At least I wanted clear conditions and no cheating. I thought it ridiculous anyway that the social services were announcing that I would have to pay back the money one day, up to every penny. Was it not that some time ago the euro was introduced in Germany, and therefore euro cents? Where the hell was I supposed to get the pennies from? I was almost tempted to write that office idiot that I was willing to do the repayments if they could guarantee me a job when I would be almost 50 years of age, and also a job above the minimum wages to afford the reimbursement. I didn't do it. Instead, I asked him to seek Jeff, talk to him, and pass a further letter from me. It was worth a try. I also explained to Mr. Waldman that I needed contacts to Brazilian men for marriage, and asked him for help by bringing me relevant magazines or newspapers. Once again, my hopes were growing a little. If Jeff did not want me anymore, I would find anyone else to marry me, so that I could stay in Brazil. Why return back to Europe, and for what? My son I had long since lost. All my stuff belonged to me once, my dog, everything. Return to whom, or what for? Because of work? Who would employ me yet with this high unemployment rate? I was sure that I had here in Brazil far more opportunities than in Europe. The Saturday I spent with Sandra, unfortunately in my cell instead of hers, to be watching TV. But I could not leave my stuff unattended anymore. These stupid women in my cell kept sniffing around, stealing my things like hell. But in the morning I had entered into another conflict with my enemy. When I woke up at 6, I noticed letters on her pillow just under her head. Since I was not sure whether Saturday letters were issued at all, I was confused a little at first. Perhaps they were her written letters, but I wanted to make sure and kept watching her. My opportunity came when she moved her head in her sleep, and I grabbed the letters. In fact, 2 of them were for me. So it came to the big crash in the early morning. Elia tried to appease that it might have happened by accident. What? Since when were letters thrown through the window in the door and land by mistake under the head of someone? I yelled, and turning to Jacqueline, "You have no right to control my letters or even to suppress them. Is that clear once and for all?" This woman hated me like the plague, and the fact that Sandra was sitting with me the whole day was also a thorn in the eyes of these primitive women, especially as we did it comfortably with Coke and chips. But I offered the other 2 also Coca-Cola and from my chocolate. Stubbornly, I ignored Jacqueline. I knew this hit her in the hardest way, so hard that it even meant a sleepless night for her. Round 2 and 3 was on me. Of course, I was aware that I was pretty much leaning out the window with my provocation. Sandra warned me on Sunday that they conspired against me and were planning to beat me up. Well, I wasn't really worried because I reckoned that they owned at least as much brains to be aware this would have the consequences of penalties. As long as the cells were opened, they could hardly do something, and when we were locked in, they could hardly say later, "It wasn't us." I remained calm, and indeed nothing happened. Only 9 more days in the cell, and this was indeed a continuation of the hell of Arusha. What these women gave me here. No, they were not violent. They didn't need to be, because it was already bad enough with the filth and stench in the cell where I couldn't get away, being locked up with them. In Arusha, I could at least get up and sit down somewhere else. Here, it wasn't possible. Again and again overcame me the constant feeling of need to vomit. They spread themselves on my bed, picking the lice from their heads. Mine started to itch suspiciously. Or they were poking about on their feet and spread fragments of skin on my bed, unless it ended up in the mouths of these filthy swines. I certainly couldn't sleep any more, and was a nervous wreck at the end. Felt completely demoralized and depressed. This was reflecting, of course, in the letters I wrote. So in the letter to Michael, I wrote how sad and disappointed I was for not receiving other mail of him, and that I was convinced he was under very bad influence, and would probably prefer to forget me. Thus, I saw no reason to return to Europe. I described to him how well I had learned the Portuguese language, just to stay, and intended to marry only to avoid at all costs the deportation to Germany, the country that stole my son. During the care in Spain, not a single time it was mentioned, the cost-sharing, nor did they threaten me to deprive me of custody. Why had Michael returned to Germany? Whenever I wrote Michael, I struggled with my tears, but I tried to show no weakness in front of these pictures. The fact was, however, this pain that my beloved son had also let me down was overwhelming. That was why I could impossibly delay this letter any longer, asking for clarity of him and to let me know where I stood. If necessary, I needed an answer of his guardian if he himself didn't want to write to me. I clearly pointed out that I also had a right to carry on with my life, and that it was only depending on him if I was to look only forward and never back again. To Rosie I also wrote, already the second unanswered letter, after Mr. Waldman had provided that my book, my life story, was sent to her, and she had promised to deal with it, that it was published. I asked her not to let me down after everyone else did, and I very much hoped she was not ill. I needed her and her support so much. In the letter I described to her what I wrote to Michael, and what were my plans. I repeatedly asked her to take care of my book, because if it should sell, this would be the only money to start a new life with. To Michael and Rosie, I passed on the information I got from the German consulate in Malaga, that Max, my beloved dog, was still alive and had been adopted. By whom it was not known. However, this was the only good news I got from those damned German consulates. Mr. Sturm reproaching me constantly that I would get him into trouble, I saw absolutely no motive for it, because I hadn't done anything wrong. Stapled this stupid account transaction receipt to my file so that the vice consul was always very helpful according to the continuation of the social assistance payment. Had found it now when Mr. Sturm was on vacation. Since I previously kept it a secret to have an account in Spain, because I couldn't get hold of the money anyway, it was me now who found herself in difficulties. If the social welfare would have investigated any further, I could have forgotten my welfare. The only way to get out of this number was by justifying myself in a new questionnaire that this account was never actively used, and thus fell into oblivion. This amount of €181, which they now interpreted no longer as overdraft, but as money I owned, I, in return, declared now this money as overdraft in blind reliance, that the German authorities would not deal with a Spanish bank. Since these German authority idiots couldn't even speak English, let alone Spanish. Ironically, I was lucky that these useless idiots actually took it for an account statement. Furious, I wrote to Mr. Waldman what I thought of Mr. Sturm, and how he initially had turned my innermost outward so that he could apply for social assistance, and then almost destroyed everything with his stupid transaction statement, which was totally worthless for him, and neither was it meant for him but for Mrs. Bischoff exclusively. I asked Mr. Waldman again if he already spoke with Jeff, and also asked him again about newspapers with personal ads. The sooner I would find someone to marry, the better it was. I didn't only want to prevent the deportation, but get rid of the shit German consulate with a marriage. I repeatedly asked to leave my case to the Spanish consulate, as all my belongings, account, etc., my residence was in Spain, and I owned the Spanish residence, so I had the right to be treated as a Spanish citizen. Mr. Sturm, however, kept fighting against it and refused to give up my case because of my German passport. I felt such a strong hatred for this ignorant person and against the state which took my son that it was my biggest wish now to drop the German national citizenship once and for all. All these thoughts occupied me while in the PE, the prison next to the PFC. A riot was raging. Large-scale operation for the police. We even heard shots. For me, the worst that day was that the doors stayed locked. Nobody was allowed outside for safety reasons. Riots usually spread to other prisons, as I later learned. 24 hours claustrophobia and panic attacks, which I repressed with difficulty. I succeeded, however, despite the excitement, to give Donna Isabel secretly a message that I wanted no male inside this cell anymore. When the others were taking a shower, she asked me why. I pointed out that Claudia would explain in detail because it was too risky for me to do so,